I swear by my life and everything I hold dear, I will not fail.
Let it be so.
The grand hall of Castle Nocthar stretched upward into darkness, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that no torchlight could penetrate. Stone columns carved with ancient runes lined the chamber, each one inscribed with the names of vampire lords who had ruled these lands for millennia. The air hung heavy with the scent of old incense and something metallic, a reminder that this was a place where blood held power. Tonight, the hall overflowed with bodies. Hundreds of humans packed the stone floor, summoned by royal decree for the autumn tithe, a ceremony where the vampire nobility selected servants, soldiers, and blood donors from among the mortal population. It was an honor, the proclamations always said. To serve the immortal throne was to be lifted above the common masses. Luka Valmere knew better. He stood near the back of the crowd, his thin frame barely visible among the broader shoulders of farmers and tradesmen. At 16, he looked younger, his face gaunt, cheekbones too pronounced, skin carrying the perpetual pallor of someone who spent more time in bed than on his feet. The simple gray tunic he wore hung loose on his body, and he gripped the wall for support, trying to steady his breathing. The fever had come again that morning, as it always did. His mother had begged him to stay home, but Luka refused. This ceremony only happened once every 5 years. This was his chance. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a platform of polished obsidian, sat the throne of Nocthar, and upon it, bathed in the crimson glow of enchanted braziers, was Queen Mercia von Bridgid. Even from this distance she commanded absolute attention. Her hair fell like a cascade of fresh snow against the midnight black of her gown, and her skin seemed to emit its own pale luminescence. But it was her eyes that captured everyone who dared to look. Deep red, like garnets held up to candlelight, ancient and infinitely aware. She sat with perfect stillness, one pale hand resting on the arm of her throne, fingers adorned with rings that had seen centuries pass. Beside her stood her council, Lord Severin, the master of arms, whose scarred face told stories of countless battles, Lady Isolde, the keeper of blood rites draped in robes the color of dried roses, and Commander Theron, captain of the Crimson Guard, his armor polished to a mirror shine. The ceremony proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Names were called. Young men and women stepped forward. Assignments were given: servant to the eastern wing, stable hand, kitchen staff, occasional blood donor for the lesser nobility. Each human bowed deeply, accepted their fate, and retreated. Luka watched it all with growing frustration. None of this mattered. None of these people understood what serving the throne could truly mean. Next grouping, Lord Severin announced, his voice echoing through the hall. Those seeking positions in the military division, step forward. A dozen young men moved toward the platform, broad-shouldered farmers' sons, blacksmiths' apprentices, anyone with the build for soldiering. They formed a line, and Commander Theron walked among them, evaluating them with the cold precision of a butcher selecting meat. "You'll serve in the border patrol," he said to one. "You, supply transport." Another. "Guard rotation, northern towers." Luka felt his chest tighten. This was wrong. They were wasting these people on menial tasks when the Queen needed true protectors, warriors who would give everything, who understood loyalty beyond mere obligation. Before he realized what he was doing, Luka pushed away from the wall. His legs felt like water beneath him, threatening to collapse with each step, but he forced them forward. The crowd parted slightly. people glancing at him with confusion and pity. Whispers followed in his wake. "That's the Valmere boy. Sick all his life. Can barely walk. What is he doing?" Luka ignored them all, his eyes fixed on the throne, on the queen's imperious figure watching the proceedings with detached interest. Step by step, he crossed the vast hall, each breath burning in his lungs. Commander Theron noticed him first. The warrior's hand moved instinctively to his sword hilt. "Halt. The military candidates have already..." But Luka didn't stop. He reached the base of the obsidian platform and dropped to one knee, his body trembling with the effort of remaining upright. He placed his right hand over his heart in the traditional gesture of fealty. The entire hall fell silent. Queen Mercia's red eyes shifted downward, focusing on him for the first time. Her expression remained unreadable, carved from marble. "Speak," she commanded, her voice like silk over steel. Luka raised his head, meeting her gaze directly, a presumption that made several nobles hiss in disapproval. But he couldn't look away. Wouldn't. "Your Majesty," his voice came out stronger than he expected, carrying through the silent hall. "I offer you my oath, my life, my blood, my sword, everything I am and everything I will become. I swear to serve you until my last breath, to be your shield against any threat, to stand where others fall." A strange sound rippled through the assembled nobles. It took Luka a moment to recognize it. Laughter. Lord Severin was smirking openly. Lady Isolde covered her mouth with delicate fingers, her shoulders shaking. Even Commander Theron looked away, uncomfortable witnessing such public foolishness. But Queen Mercia did not laugh. Not yet. She rose from her throne with fluid grace, descending the obsidian steps until she stood directly before Luka. This close, he could see the intricate patterns embroidered on her gown, silver threads forming shapes that seemed to move in the firelight. Could smell something faintly sweet, like night-blooming flowers mixed with old parchment. She tilted her head slightly, studying him the way one might examine an unusual insect. "You offer me your sword," she said softly. Then, with a gesture almost gentle, she reached down and grasped Luka's right hand, pulling it away from his chest. His hand looked pathetic in her pale grip, thin, trembling, the fingers too long and delicate. She turned it over, examining it from multiple angles. "This hand," Mercia continued, her voice carrying that terrible gentleness, "can barely hold a quill, much less a blade. Look at yourself, child. You shake from merely kneeling. Your fever marks are visible even in this light." She released his hand, and it dropped heavily to his side. The queen stepped back, and now, finally, she smiled. It was beautiful and devastating, like watching winter descend on a garden. "You cannot even lift a sword," Queen Mercia said, and this time she did laugh, a sound like crystal bells in a frozen cathedral. "And you presume to offer yourself as my protector?" The nobles erupted. Laughter cascaded through the hall, each peal of mirth another nail driving into Luka's pride. He felt it physically, each laugh a blade twisting in his chest. Commander Theron stepped forward. "Remove him. This is an embarrassment to the ceremony." 2 guards moved to comply, but Luka spoke again, his voice cutting through the mockery. "I will become strong enough." The laughter didn't stop, but some eyes turned back to him. "I swear it," Luka continued, still kneeling, still holding the queen's gaze. "One day I will return, and when I do, I will be worthy of the oath I've spoken here." Queen Mercia's smile didn't fade, but something flickered in her ancient eyes, perhaps curiosity, perhaps pity. "If you survive that long," she said dismissively, waving her hand, Guards, escort him out, gently. He looks ready to break. The ceremony resumed as if he'd never existed. That night, Luka lay in his narrow bed in the servants' quarters on the castle's outer grounds, staring at the ceiling beams. His mother sat beside him, wringing a cloth in cool water to place on his forehead. "You shouldn't have done that," Maria Valmere whispered, her voice tight with worry. "The nobles will remember. They'll make things harder for us. Let them remember," Luka replied quietly. His mother's eyes glistened with tears. "You're my son, my only child. Please, Luka, stop fighting against what you are. You're sick. You've always been sick. There's no shame in accepting that." Luka turned his head to look at her. "I can't accept it, Mother, because if I do, then this is all there is. Forever. Just this. This is life," she said gently. "No." Luka's hand clenched into a fist, his nails digging into his palm. "This is barely surviving. There has to be more. There has to be a way to become more." Maria pressed the cloth to his forehead, her touch infinitely sad. Some things can't be changed through willpower alone. But Luka had already made his decision. 3 days later, before dawn broke over the castle walls, he left. A small pack contained everything he owned: a change of clothes, his father's old hunting knife, a small pouch of coins saved over years, and a piece of bread wrapped in cloth. He left a note for his mother. "I will return when I'm worthy of my oath. I love you." The eastern gate stood unguarded at this hour. The vampires slept in their deep chambers, and the human guards were accustomed to early-rising servants heading to the markets. Luka pulled his hood low and slipped through. The road stretched before him, disappearing into forest that local legends claimed were older than the vampire kingdoms themselves. Somewhere out there, beyond the known territories, people spoke of wandering knights, hidden monasteries, battlefields where strength could be forged. Somewhere out there was the answer to becoming what he needed to be. Luka took one last look back at Castle Nokthar, its black towers silhouetted against the lightening sky. The queen's laughter still echoed in his memory. "You cannot even lift a sword." "Not yet," he whispered to himself, "but I will." Then he turned and walked into the unknown. 17 years later, the autumn wind carried the scent of death across the eastern borderlands. Luka Valmere stood atop a rocky outcrop, surveying the carnage below. 300 orc warriors lay scattered across the valley floor, their crude armor shattered, their war banners trampled into the mud. His own forces, 200 disciplined mercenaries, were already gathering weapons and preparing pyres for the fallen. The battle had lasted less than an hour. "General," a voice called from behind him. Captain Wren, his second in command, climbed the rocks with practiced ease. The veteran soldier's scarred face showed no emotion, but Luka had learned to read the subtle tension in his jaw. "Scouts report the main orc horde is 3 days' march from Castle Nokthar. They'll reach the outer villages by week's end." Luka nodded slowly, his right hand flexing unconsciously. The gauntlet covering it seemed to pulse with a faint green luminescence, visible even in daylight. Intricate patterns of living metal and what appeared to be petrified wood wound around his forearm, disappearing beneath his sleeve. Where it met flesh, thin root-like veins spread across his skin, green and gold, as if the forest itself had claimed him. "How many in the horde?" he asked. "Estimates vary, between 8 and 10,000. 10,000. Castle Nokthar's forces numbered perhaps 3,000, and most of those were vampire nobility who viewed military strategy as beneath them, preferring to rely on individual power and immortality rather than coordinated defense. They would be slaughtered. "Send word to the castle," Luka commanded. "Tell them the general of the Green Gauntlet offers his services. No payment required. Only audience with the Queen." First, Captain Wren's eyebrow rose slightly, the closest he ever came to showing surprise. "After all these years, you're finally returning." "I made a promise," Luka said simply. 17 years earlier. The first 3 months after leaving Castle Nocthar nearly killed him. Luka's fever worsened without his mother's careful tending. He collapsed twice on the road, waking hours later in ditches, rain-soaked and shivering. The coins in his pouch ran out quickly. He learned to steal bread from merchant carts, to sleep in barns and caves, to avoid the traveling patrols that might recognize him as a runaway serf. He tried to join a mercenary company in the town of Grey Hollow. The captain took one look at his trembling hands and laughed, a sound that reminded Luka painfully of Queen Mercia. "Come back when you can hold a sword without dropping it, boy." He tried to apprentice with a blacksmith. The man put a hammer in his hand. Luka managed 3 swings before his arms gave out. Not strong enough. Next. Everywhere he went, the same verdict. Too weak, too sick, not worth the investment. Winter came early that year. Luka found himself in the Thornwood Forest, a sprawling wilderness that marked the border between vampire territories and the lawless lands beyond. Local villagers whispered that the forest was cursed, that old things dwelled there, things that predated even the vampire lords. Luka didn't care about curses. The forest offered shelter, and he was dying. He'd gone 4 days without food. The fever had become constant, his vision swimming with dark spots. He knew, distantly, that this was the end. His body had finally reached its limit. "I'm sorry, Mother," he thought, collapsing against an ancient oak tree. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I tried." The tree's roots were massive, pushing up through the earth like the fingers of a buried giant. Luka leaned against them, feeling the rough bark against his cheek. Strange. The wood felt warm, almost alive in a way that went beyond ordinary trees. His eyes drifted closed. That's when he heard the voice. "Dying, are you?" The words didn't come through his ears. They resonated inside his skull, deep and old, like bedrock shifting beneath the earth. Luka's eyes snapped open. The forest looked different now, the colors too vivid, the shadows too deep. And there, carved into the bark of the oak, was a face. Not a natural pattern, an actual face, ancient, weathered, with eyes that glowed faint green. "You carry determination," the voice continued, emanating from the tree itself. "Rare in dying things. Most simply accept the void." "Who?" Luka's voice came out as a rasp. "What are you?" "I am Vailor. Once they called me the Green Father, the root of the world. I was old when the first vampire crawled from its grave, when the first human built their first fire." The carved face seemed to shift, forming something like a smile. "Now I am forgotten, imprisoned, diminished." "A god," Luka whispered. "Once, before the blood drinkers rose to power, before their dark magic spread across these lands, the forests were sovereign. My roots connected every living thing. But the vampires feared what they could not control. They performed a ritual, binding me to this place, severing my connection to the greater world." The green glow intensified, and Luka felt something, energy, power, ancient and wild, radiating from the tree. "I have waited centuries for someone suitable, someone with enough need, enough hunger for strength, enough will to accept what I offer." What do you offer?" Luka managed. "A bargain. I give you power beyond mortal limitation, strength that will never falter, a body that will heal from any wound, the might to face armies and emerge victorious." The wooden face leaned closer, somehow, despite being carved into immobile bark. In exchange, you become my vessel. You carry a piece of me into the world beyond this prison. Through you, I touch the world again. Luka's feverish mind struggled to process this. A vessel? What does that mean? I will forge a gauntlet from my very essence, living wood and primordial metal bound to your flesh. It will grant you my power, but I will exist within it. I will see through your eyes. Speak in your thoughts, guide your hand when necessary. You would control me. No, partnership, symbiosis. You remain yourself, but you are never alone. I cannot force your actions. Such bonds are useless, but in moments of great need, I may suggest influence. The gauntlet cannot be removed. Once forged, it becomes part of you forever. Luka looked down at his right hand, trembling and weak, then at his left, equally useless. Why me? He asked. Because you are dying, and the dying have nothing left to lose. Because you possess something precious, a promise made in earnest, a debt of honor that burns in your soul. The green eyes seemed to see through him. You swore an oath to a vampire queen. Such oaths create bonds that even gods can sense. That kind of determination is valuable. Luka felt consciousness slipping away. His heart was slowing, he could feel it, each beat coming further apart. If I refuse, you die. Within the hour, this forest claims your body. In a century, no one will remember you existed. And if I accept, you live, you become. You fulfill your promise or die trying, but you die on your feet as a warrior, not as a sick child rotting in the leaves. It wasn't really a choice. I accept, Luka whispered. The forest erupted with green light. Pain beyond description tore through Luka's right arm. He screamed, watching in horror as the roots of the great oak tore free from the earth, writhing like serpents. They wrapped around his hand, his wrist, his forearm, burning, fusing, transforming. Wood became metal, became flesh, became something entirely new. His bones reformed, strengthening. His muscles, wasted by years of illness, suddenly filled with impossible vitality. The fever that had haunted him since childhood burned away like morning frost under sunlight. When the light finally faded, Luka knelt in the dirt, gasping. His right arm was no longer entirely his own. From fingertips to elbow, a gauntlet of living metal covered his skin, dark green with veins of gold running through it like sap. Where it met his flesh, thin roots had grown beneath the skin, visible as delicate traceries of emerald and amber. He flexed his fingers experimentally. The gauntlet moved like a second skin, perfectly responsive. Stand, Vylor's voice commanded, no longer external, but resonating from the gauntlet itself. Stand and feel what you have become. Luka stood. For the first time in his life, his body obeyed without protest. No trembling, no weakness. He felt solid, real, powerful. He reached down and grasped a fallen branch thicker than his thigh. With his left hand, he could barely lift it. With his right, the wood splintered like dry kindling. This is only the beginning, Valor said. You have the strength now, but strength without skill is merely brutality. You must learn to wield what I have given you. You must become worthy of the power you carry. How? Luka asked, his voice steady for the first time in years. Travel, fight, learn. The world is vast and filled with those who can teach you, if you can survive long enough to find them. I will guide you when I can, but much of this journey must be yours alone. Luka looked down at the gauntlet, at his reflection in its polished surface. He looked different, still young but no longer fragile. His eyes held something new, Hunger, purpose, hope. Then I'll learn, he said quietly. I'll become strong enough to return, strong enough to fulfill my oath. Good, Valor purred, because the vampire queen you serve has no idea what approach is. In the lawless lands, armies gather. Old grudges awaken. War is coming to her doorstep. Then I'll be ready, Luka said. When she needs me, I'll be there. Such devotion, the god mused. Let us hope she proves worthy of it. The years that followed were brutal. Luka traveled to the war-torn borderlands where mercenary companies fought endless skirmishes. He joined them starting as the lowest rank, taking every dangerous assignment, learning through blood and desperation. The gauntlet made him strong, but it didn't make him invincible. He took wounds, deep, terrible wounds that would have killed normal men. But each time, the power of Valor would surge through him, knitting flesh, mending bone, pulling him back from death's edge. He learned strategy from a disgraced general who traded knowledge for wine, combat techniques from a monastery of warrior monks who recognized the divine power in his gauntlet and taught him to channel it properly, survival from the countless times he should have died but didn't. And always, Valor whispered, sometimes guidance, sometimes warnings, sometimes just presence, a reminder that Luka was never truly alone. Good strike, but you telegraph your movements. That commander is lying. I can feel deception in his heartbeat. Sleep? You are strong, but even my power cannot sustain a body without rest. It was strange having a god living in his mind, but over time it became familiar, almost comfortable. Luka's reputation grew. The young warrior who never retreated. The general who won battles against impossible odds. The man with the green gauntlet who commanded loyalty through competence rather than fear. And finally, after 17 years of preparation, war came knocking on Castle Nocthar's door. The orc horde, 10,000 strong, led by warlord Grath the Bone Crusher, who had united the scattered tribes for the first time in centuries. It was time. Captain Wren returned with the castle's response 3 days later. Queen Mercia grants you audience, he reported. Tonight at moonrise, you are to come alone. Luka looked toward the distant towers of Castle Nocthar, black spires against the evening sky. The place he'd fled from as a broken child, the place he would return to as a general. Nervous? Valor asked, amusement coloring his mental voice. No, Luka said quietly. Then, more honestly, yes. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Now go. Show the vampire queen what her mockery created. Luka mounted his horse, adjusting the dark cloak that concealed most of his armor. The gauntlet gleamed beneath his sleeve, eager. It was time to fulfill a promise made 17 years ago. Time to kneel before the queen once more. The grand hall of Castle Nocthar had not changed. The same vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadow. The same stone columns carved with ancient names. The same crimson braziers casting their blood-colored light across polished floors. Even the scent was identical. Incense and iron, power and age. But Luka had changed. He walked through the massive doors with steady steps, his boots echoing in the cavernous space. No trembling, no fever-weakened stumbling. His posture was that of a man who had commanded armies, who had stared down death 100 times and emerged victorious. The hall was less crowded than during that fateful ceremony 17 years ago. Only the vampire nobility remained, perhaps 30 lords and ladies arranged in a semicircle around the obsidian throne platform. They watched him approach with expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. And there, seated upon her throne exactly as he remembered, was Queen Mercia von Bridgid. Time had not touched her. Of course it hadn't. She was immortal. The same cascade of white hair, the same pale, luminous skin, the same red eyes that could freeze a man's blood with a glance. She wore a gown of deepest burgundy tonight, embroidered with silver patterns that seemed to shift like smoke. Beside her stood the familiar faces of her council, Lord Severin, older and more scarred but still radiating martial authority, Lady Isolde, the keeper of blood rights, her ageless beauty as unsettling as ever, Commander Theron, now sporting a streak of grey in his dark hair, one of the few half-human nobles, bearing the mark of his mortal heritage. Luka stopped at the base of the platform, exactly where he had knelt all those years ago. The Queen regarded him with cool interest, like a scholar examining an unexpected specimen. "So," Mercia said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the hall, "the General of the Green Gauntlet, we have heard tales of your exploits. 300 victories, they say. Never defeated, never retreated." Her head tilted slightly. "Quite impressive for a mercenary." "Your Majesty," Luka replied, his voice steady and deep, nothing like the tremulous whisper of his youth. "I come offering my service. The orc horde approaches your borders. In 7 days they will reach your outer villages. In 14 they will stand before these very walls." "We are aware of the threat," Lord Severin interjected, his tone dismissive. "We do not require the assistance of human sellswords. The Crimson Guard has defended this kingdom for centuries." Luka's gaze didn't leave the Queen. "The Crimson Guard numbers 800. Well-trained, yes, formidable individually. But the orcs bring 10,000 warriors, united under a single warlord for the first time in living memory. This is not a raid. This is an invasion." "And you propose to stop them?" Lady Isolde asked, amusement in her melodic voice. "You and your, 200 mercenaries?" 243, Luka corrected. "Disciplined, experienced, each one a veteran of at least 20 campaigns. And yes, with proper strategy and support from your forces, we can break the horde." Commander Theron stepped forward. "Bold words, but strategy requires trust, and we know nothing of you beyond rumors. For all we know, you could be a spy, sent to weaken our defenses from within." "Then test me," Luka said simply. "Give me a task. Let me prove my worth before the horde arrives." Queen Mercia raised one pale hand, silencing further debate. She rose from her throne with fluid grace, descending the obsidian steps until she stood directly before Luka, just as she had 17 years ago. Up close, Luka could see the inhuman perfection of her features, the way firelight seemed to dance in her red eyes. She was smaller than him now. He had grown tall and broad-shouldered, but her presence still filled the space between them with absolute authority. "Remove your glove," she commanded softly. Luka hesitated only a moment. Then he pulled off the leather glove covering his right hand. The gauntlet gleamed in the brazier light, living metal and wood, green and gold, with those delicate root veins spreading up his forearm beneath the skin. It was beautiful and unnatural, clearly the work of something beyond mortal craft. The hall fell silent. Queen Mercia stared at the gauntlet, and for the first time since Luka had entered, genuine emotion crossed her face. Surprise, and something else, recognition. "Velor," she whispered. The gauntlet pulsed with green light, and Velor's voice resonated, audible to all present, ancient and vast. "Mercia von Bridgid, youngest daughter of the Blood Moon dynasty. It has been, 4 centuries since we last spoke. The queen's eyes narrowed. 5. You were imprisoned by my grandmother's ritual. How is it you speak now? Through my vessel, through the bargain struck in desperation and honored in dedication. This human carries a fragment of my essence. Where he goes, I go. Lord Severin's hand moved to his sword. Your Majesty, this is clearly some form of ancient magic, possibly dangerous. Peace, Severin, Mercia interrupted, still studying the gauntlet. Valor was old when my bloodline was young. Powerful, yes, dangerous certainly, but bound by the laws of bargains, if he has chosen this man as his vessel. She looked up, meeting Luka's eyes directly. Then there must be something exceptional about him. She reached out slowly, her pale fingers hovering just above the gauntlet's surface. May I? Luka nodded. Her touch was cool against the living metal. The moment her skin made contact, the gauntlet flared with brilliant green light, and Luka felt a surge of something, information, memory, connection. He saw flashes of the past. Mercia as a young vampire, barely 20 years dead, learning statecraft from her grandmother. The great ritual that had bound Valor, performed to protect the vampire kingdoms from the forest god's influence. Treaties and wars, centuries of history compressed into heartbeats. And Mercia saw too. He could feel her presence in his mind, seeing his memories, the sick child kneeling before her throne, the humiliation, the years of training, the battles won through determination and pain, the promise carried like a torch through darkness. She pulled her hand back sharply and the connection severed. For a long moment, the queen simply stared at him. Then, incredibly, she laughed. But this time, the sound held no mockery. It was genuine amusement, perhaps even a hint of respect. I remember you, she said quietly. The boy who could barely kneel without collapsing. The one who swore to be my sword. Her red eyes gleamed. I mocked you. We all did. I remember, Your Majesty, Luka said. You should have died. That fever should have claimed you within months of leaving my kingdom. It would have, Luka admitted. But I made a promise and I don't break my promises. Mercia turned, walking a slow circle around him, examining him from all angles. 17 years. You spent 17 years becoming strong enough to return, all because of a vow made in foolish youth. She stopped in front of him again. Tell me, why? What drives such obsession? Luka considered the question carefully. When you mocked me, Your Majesty, it hurt, but it also clarified something. I realized that I had been accepting weakness as my fate, as if being born sick meant I could never be anything more. Your laughter showed me that I had to choose, accept what I was or fight to become something else. He paused. You gave me a gift that day, the gift of absolute clarity. And now you've returned, seeking what? Redemption? Revenge? Neither, Luka said. I returned to fulfill my oath. You need a general. I am here. Commander Theron spoke up again. Your Majesty, we still know nothing of his true capabilities. Yes, he carries ancient power, but can he actually lead? Strategy on paper differs from strategy in battle. Queen Mercia smiled slowly. A fair point. She turned to Luka. Tomorrow, at dawn, Commander Theron will lead a force to the Blackstone Ridge, a strategic position overlooking the eastern approach. The orcs have been scouting there. You will accompany them. Prove that you are more than just a vessel for old magic. Show me you can actually fight. As you command, Your Majesty, Luka said, bowing his head. And Luka, Mercia added, her voice dropping to a tone only he could hear. If you survive tomorrow's test, we will speak again, privately. There are things I would know, things I saw in your memories that... intrigue me." She turned and ascended the steps to her throne, settling into it with regal grace. The audience is concluded. Commander Theron, see to the arrangements. Lord Severin, assess our current defensive positions. Lady Isolde, consult the blood auguries. I want to know if the old magic warns of anything we're missing. The nobles began to disperse, moving toward the hall's various exits. Luka remained still, watching as the queen settled back into her role of cold authority. But just before he turned to leave, he saw it, the briefest flicker of something in her red eyes as she glanced his way. Curiosity. "She's interested," Vailor murmured in his mind, "and not just in military matters." That touch revealed more than a tactical information. She felt your dedication, your years of sacrifice. For someone as old as she is, such purity of purpose is rare. She's a queen, Luka thought back. An immortal. I'm just a human who made a promise. Perhaps, or perhaps you are the first person in centuries who has surprised her. Do not underestimate what that means to someone who has lived as long as she has. That night, Luka stood on the castle battlements, looking out over the darkened landscape. His men were camped outside the walls, waiting for orders. In the distance, he could see the thornwood forest where his journey had truly begun. "General," a voice said behind him. He turned to find a young vampire woman in servant's garb, one of the lesser nobility, judging by the faint red tint to her eyes. She bowed respectfully. "The Queen requests your presence in her private study. She says she wishes to continue your earlier conversation." Luka's heart rate increased slightly. "Interesting," Vailor commented. "Lead the way," Luka said. The servant guided him through twisting corridors, past guards who watched him with suspicion, up spiraling staircases carved from black stone. Finally, she stopped before an ornate door of dark wood, knocked twice, and departed. "Enter," came Mercia's voice from within. Luka pushed open the door. The study was smaller than he'd expected, more intimate. Shelves lined the walls, filled with ancient books and scrolls. A fireplace crackled with flames that burned blue instead of orange. Vampire fire, sustained by magic rather than wood. Queen Mercia stood by a window, looking out at the night, a goblet of deep red liquid in her hand. She didn't turn as he entered. "Close the door, Luka Valmere." He did. "When I touched your gauntlet," she said quietly, "I saw your memories, your struggle, your determination. But I also felt something else." She finally turned to face him. "Devotion, not just to your oath, but to me." "Why?" Luka met her gaze steadily. "You were the first person who ever expected anything of me, even if it was mockery, even if you laughed. For that one moment, I existed to you. That meant something. That is not devotion. That is obsession." "Perhaps," Luka admitted. "The line between them can be thin." Mercia moved closer, her movements predatory and graceful. "And now that you've returned strong and capable, what do you want from me, truly?" Luka considered lying, offering some diplomatic answer, but something in her red eyes demanded honesty. "I want to prove that I am worthy of the oath I made. I want to protect your kingdom, and..." He hesitated, then continued, "I want you to see me. Truly see me. Not as the sick boy you mocked, but as the man I've become." The queen stood very close now. He could smell that strange sweet scent again, stronger now, night flowers and old parchment and something indefinably ancient. "I see you, Luka Valmere," she said softly. "The question is, what will I do with what I see?" Before he could respond, she stepped back. "Tomorrow, you will prove yourself in battle. If you survive, if you demonstrate the skill you claim, Then we will discuss what comes next. For now, rest. Dawn approaches swiftly. It was clearly a dismissal. Luka bowed. Your Majesty. As he reached the door, her voice stopped him once more. Luka, that promise you made, to be my sword, my shield, do you still mean it? He looked back at her, silhouetted against the blue flames. Every word, Your Majesty, until my last breath. Something flickered across her face, too fast to read. Then she nodded. We shall see. Dawn broke blood red over Blackstone Ridge. Luka stood at the forefront of the defensive line, his army of 243 arranged in disciplined formations behind him. To his right, Commander Theron commanded 300 of the Crimson Guard, vampire warriors in gleaming armor, their red eyes scanning the horizon with predatory focus. The morning mist clung to the valley below, but Luka could already hear them, the rhythmic thunder of 10,000 feet marching in unison. War drums, guttural war chants in the Orcish tongue. They come, Vilo whispered, and they are confident. They believe numbers alone will crush this defense. Then they're about to learn otherwise, Luka murmured. Commander Theron approached, his expression skeptical. Your strategy is unconventional, General. My warriors are accustomed to direct combat, not this waiting game you propose. Your warriors are individually superior, Luka acknowledged, but orc hordes rely on momentum. They charge, overwhelm, and break defensive lines through sheer mass. We deny them that momentum. He pointed to the terrain he'd studied for 3 days. Blackstone Ridge was a natural choke point, steep slopes on both sides with only one viable approach from the valley. Luka's forces held the high ground, with carefully positioned fallback points and hidden reserves. When they charge up the slope, they'll be exhausted before they reach us. Your vampires strike the flanks fast and brutal, then withdraw before they can be surrounded. My men hold the center, rotating fresh troops to the front every time the orcs break against our shields. We bleed them slowly, deny them any advantage. And if they simply go around, Theron challenged, then they add 3 days to their march, and we use that time to fortify Castle Nokthar itself. Either way, we win. The mist began to clear, revealing the orc horde. It was a tide of green flesh and crude iron stretching across the entire valley floor. At their center, mounted on a massive war beast, was Warlord Grath the Bone Crusher, a towering figure even among orcs, his armor made from the bones of his enemies. Grath raised his enormous axe toward the ridge and bellowed a challenge that echoed across the landscape. Blood, death, conquest! The horde roared in response, and the charge began. Positions, Luka commanded. His men locked shields, spears bristling between them like a steel hedge. The Crimson Guard split into 2 groups, moving with supernatural speed to the flanks, ready to strike. The orcs hit the slope at full sprint, howling their war cries, and Luka smiled, because they were doing exactly what he'd predicted. The battle lasted 6 hours. Wave after wave of orcs crashed against the shield wall, and wave after wave broke upon it. Luka fought at the center, his gauntleted fist crushing skulls, his sword, a blade forged specifically to channel Vylor's power, cutting through armor like parchment. Every time the orcs gained momentum, the Crimson Guard would strike from the sides, supernatural speed and strength scything through their ranks before vanishing back into defensive positions. Every time Luka's men began to tire, he rotated them with reserves, keeping fresh warriors at the front. Warlord Grath himself finally charged forward, his war beast trampling over his own troops in rage. You, he bellowed, pointing his massive axe at Luka. You die first. The warlord leaped from his mount, cratering the ground where he landed. He was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, muscles like iron cords beneath green skin scarred by countless battles. Luka stepped forward to meet him. Their weapons clashed with a sound like thunder. Grath was strong, stronger than any human, perhaps stronger than most vampires. But Luka had fought for 17 years. He'd faced monsters and armies, learned from masters and survived impossible odds, and he carried the power of a god in his right hand. The gauntlet blazed with green fire as Luka caught Grath's axe mid-swing, roots erupting from the ground to entangle the warlord's legs. Grath roared, tearing free, but in that moment of distraction, Luka's sword found the gap in his bone armor. The blade pierced the warlord's heart. Grath staggered, disbelief in his yellow eyes. Impossible. Nothing is impossible, Luka said quietly, when you refuse to accept defeat. The warlord fell, and the battlefield fell silent. For a moment, the orc horde simply stared. Their undefeated leader, dead at the hands of a human. Then they broke. 10,000 orcs fled in chaos, abandoning weapons, trampling each other in their panic. The Crimson Guard pursued, cutting down those too slow to escape. Commander Theron approached Luka, breathing hard despite his vampiric stamina. For the first time, respect showed in his eyes. I doubted you, he admitted. I was wrong. That was extraordinary. Luka looked across the battlefield at the victory bought with strategy and sacrifice. Send word to the Queen. The threat is ended. Castle Nocthar is safe. That evening, Luka stood once more in Queen Mercia's private study. But this time, she wasn't alone. Lord Severin, Lady Isolde, and Commander Theron stood as witnesses. On a table between Luka and the Queen lay a ceremonial sword, ancient, beautiful, with a blade that seemed to drink the firelight. Luka Valmere. Queen Mercia spoke formally, though her red eyes held warmth he'd never seen before. You have proven yourself beyond any doubt. You saved this kingdom when our own forces could not. You turned certain defeat into total victory. She lifted the ceremonial sword. Kneel. Luka knelt. Not in weakness this time, but in strength, in fulfillment. The Queen touched the blade to his right shoulder, then his left. I name you Sword of Nocthar, General of our armies, Protector of the realm. She paused, and something shifted in her expression, the formal mask falling away to reveal genuine emotion. And I accept the oath you made 17 years ago. You swore to be my sword, my shield. I accept that vow. I claim you as mine. Luka looked up, meeting her eyes. Your Majesty. Mercia, she corrected softly. In private, you may call me Mercia. She extended her hand. He took it, rising to his feet. There is one more thing, Mercia said. And now there was something almost vulnerable in her ancient gaze. When I touched your gauntlet, I saw not just your memories, but your heart. Your devotion was not merely to an oath or to duty, it was to me, personally. Luka felt the weight of every eye in the room. Yes, such devotion is rare, precious. In my long existence, I have been feared, respected, even worshipped. But I have rarely been seen, as you see me, not as a queen or a monster, but as Mercia. She stepped closer, her pale hand still in his. I am immortal. You are human. Our lives exist on different scales. But vampires can bond with humans through blood and vow, a marriage recognized by ancient law, granting the human extended life and the vampire a connection to mortality they otherwise lack. Luka's heart thundered in his chest. Are you asking? I am asking, Mercia interrupted, if the boy who promised to be my sword would consider becoming something more. My general, my consort, my husband? The study fell absolutely silent. Well, Velor murmured in amusement, this is unexpected, though I suppose 17 years of single-minded devotion does make an impression. Luka stared at the vampire queen who had once mocked him, who had laughed at his weakness, the woman who had, unknowingly, given him the drive to transform himself completely. Your Majesty, Mercia, he corrected himself. I spent 17 years becoming worthy of serving you. I never imagined that I might come to value you as more than a weapon. She smiled, and it was genuine, almost shy. Neither did I. But you surprised me, Luka Valmere. You surprised me by existing at all, by surviving, by returning, by being exactly what you promised to become. And I find, she hesitated, an immortal queen momentarily uncertain. I find that I do not wish to lose you to the passage of mortal years. Luka looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and bearing the living gauntlet, hers pale and perfect and impossibly ancient. Then he knelt once more, not in service but in proposal. Then I accept. Not because you're a queen, but because you're Mercia. Because beneath the crown and the power, I see someone who has been alone for centuries, and I swear, not as your subject but as your partner, I will stand beside you for as long as this life and any beyond it will allow. Mercia pulled him to his feet, and for the first time in 500 years, tears glistened in her red eyes. Then let it be so. She kissed him, and the ancient blood magic activated, a bond forming between immortal and mortal, vampire and human, queen and general. Luka felt it surge through him, extending his life, connecting their very souls. When they parted, Lord Severin was smiling. Well, I suppose we have a wedding to plan. Lady Isolde laughed, delighted. The court will be shocked. A human consort. How deliciously scandalous. Commander Theron simply nodded, respect evident. Long live the general. Long live the queen. 3 months later, Castle Nocthar hosted its first royal wedding in 2 centuries. Luka stood at the altar in the grand hall where he'd once been mocked, wearing armor that bore both the symbols of Nocthar and the living green gauntlet of Vailor. Beside him, Queen Mercia wore white, a bold choice for a vampire, symbolizing new beginnings. The ceremony blended vampire blood rites with human traditions, witnessed by both mortal subjects and immortal nobility. When they spoke their vows, Luka's voice carried clearly. I promised I would return strong enough to protect you. I fulfilled that promise. Now I make a new one, to stand beside you, to challenge you, to love you, for as long as existence allows. Mercia's response was equally firm. I mocked the weak boy who knelt before me. I was wrong to do so. That boy became the man who saved my kingdom, and now he becomes my husband. I vow to honor his strength, his sacrifice, and his impossible beautiful devotion. They sealed the vow in blood and kiss, and the hall erupted in celebration. You've come far, Vailor observed, his voice fond. From dying in my forest to wedding a vampire queen, quite the journey. Thank you, Luka thought back, for giving me the chance to make it. Thank you for being worthy of the gift. Now go. Your queen awaits, and for what it's worth, I believe you've earned this happiness. That night, standing on the castle battlements with Mercia at his side, Luka looked out over the kingdom he'd sworn to protect. Do you ever regret it? Mercia asked quietly. The years of suffering, the sacrifices. Luka squeezed her hand gently. Not for a moment. Every scar, every battle, every dark night, they all led here, to you, to this. She leaned against him, and for once the immortal queen simply allowed herself to be held. You were right, you know, she murmured. That day you knelt before me. You said you would become strong enough. I should never have doubted you. You couldn't have known, Luka said. I was dying, weak, hopeless. No, Mercia corrected, looking up at him with those ancient red eyes that now held only warmth. You were determined, and determination, I've learned, is the strongest power of all. In the distance, the thornwood forest stood silent under the stars. Somewhere in its depths, an ancient oak tree bore a face carved in its bark, smiling. And in Castle Nocthar, a promise made in desperation and fulfilled through devotion became the foundation of something neither vampire nor human had expected. True love, forged in mockery and tempered in 17 years of unwavering dedication. The boy who couldn't lift a sword had become the general who won a queen's heart, and they would face eternity together,